So we're going to deconstruct the standard and analyze one for second grade. I've chosen second grade, numbers and operations in base 10, so 2 MBT A1 is your code. 2 MBT A1. You'll want to reference your handout on pages 1 and 2 as we begin to answer those questions. The first thing it asks you is the language of the standard, and that's what we always use. So let me pause to give you some time to write down what you want as far as the language of the standard that will key you in to what you're working with. Understanding that the 3 digits of a 3-digit number represent amounts of hundreds, tens, and ones. The next thing we're going to ask is the domain. And the domain is actually the larger group of standards, and in this case, we're working in number and operations in base 10. So we're second grade, domain NBT. The cluster heading is denoted with the code A. So we're 2 MBT A, and that is understand place value. That's our cluster heading, and the cluster gives us a group of standards that are closely related. Now we want to understand some of the key learning for this standard. So we're going to pull up the companion document. Your grade level facilitator has probably already directed you to do this, and I've already pulled it down to where the numbers and base 10 operations standards start. Usually our companion documents give us a couple of introduction pages, and they start the standards with the OA, operations and algebraic thinking, and then we get into this numbers and base 10 operations. Again, you see our domain in green, our cluster heading, understand place value here, a short description about the cluster right underneath, and then our standard here on the left side. This one's got some special cases, so they put some subheadings here. But if we're looking for key understanding, we're going to have to actually read into this larger box. So take a moment to familiarize yourself with what is happening with second graders at this time. So I see that students are extending their base 10 understanding to hundreds as they view tens, these rods, as a bundle. It's going to be the same bundle that we put together that makes this flat. 10 rods is the same as 1 flat, or 100. That's called unitizing. So this allows them to start counting in groups, and you can see it talks here about grouped objects, and they start to begin to make the connections with the written terms as well. So while students are able to group objects into collections, they can now tell us about how many groups there are. And really we're just working through that place value understanding that can be difficult at this age. A specific strategy that we need to call out is that bundling, and it's going to happen a lot in our ZERN curriculum where they have to bundle 10 together to make 100, and then also when we get into subtraction they have to unbundle this in order to subtract some in the tens place. The prerequisite skills listed here, you can see previous grade standard, the 1 NBT B2. And that, if I were to click there and go into that hyperlink, it tells me that students had to understand a 2-digit number in first grade as representing tens and ones. And they have to know that a 10 is called a 10. They understand that unit of 10. The other question we're answering here is the component of rigor. And because this is the first time students are really introduced into hundreds, we're talking about conceptual understanding. So we're going to review the standards for this instance in our end of year assessment rubric. When we do this in the fall, we'll use our quarterly diagnostic rubrics. But right now we're going to look at items 1, 2, and 4. So I'm going to ask you to think about why we may not really focus our time in on item 3. The reason we are not focusing too much effort here in item 3 is because of the standard 2MD BO5. Remember, we've decided in 2nd grade that we are going to focus our efforts this summer for the intensive program in the domains of OA, operations and algebraic thinking, and NBT, numbers and base 10 operations. So although this MD standard is a major piece of work for 2nd grade, we're not focusing our efforts there in the 10 days we get with our students in July. So we know that this end of year rubric is interactive. So I'm gonna pull that up here. Because the standards are actually embedded with the Achieve the Core Coherence link, we wanna look at the major work this standard is connected to. This gives you an idea of why we are focusing our efforts in on these domains. 2OA B2 has connections to previous major work in 1st grade, and it's still giving us major work in 2nd grade for a whole nother domain, that other major focus in BT B5. If I go back into the end of year rubric and click on item 2, which actually is that 2 in BT B5, you'll see many previous standards that link to this one, some standards we teach concurrently, and then those standards that are going to be directly connected or indirectly connected in this sense for 3rd and 4th grade, looking at operations and algebraic thinking, and then this even sets the tone for 4th grade numbers and operations with fractions. The data for items 3 and 4 on paper, but we know in Illuminate sometimes those don't look the same because of how our items had to be broken up. So we're looking at item 3 on paper, which is actually item 9 in your matrix report, item 4 on paper, which is item 10 in my Illuminate matrix report. If I look at these columns, first I notice something. This item number 9 was multiple choice. The answer was C. But as I look down at some of the people who missed these, I'm starting to notice that there are 0s and 1s. So this is an error in teacher hand entering scores into Illuminate. This is actual data from Caddo, and it's the first 20 students at a specific school. And no, I don't remember the school. But I can see that one teacher didn't properly enter her scores, while the other teacher actually entered her scores or her answers incorrectly. It's highly important that for multiple choice, you enter the letter choice the students chose. So I am going to circle those students, AA, JA, SA, LB, TB, AC, and FD, that show 0s or 1s. The 1s probably mean they got it correct. The 0s probably got it incorrect, but I don't know what letter choice they chose, so I'd have to look deeper into the student work or check with the teacher. So really I'm only gonna put the 3 people that I know missed this item for sure over here in my students who need acceleration. For item 2, this was correctly entered by everyone because this was constructed response or open-ended, where they had to actually enter the number 235. So as Dr. Kat Michelle's put, with these math equation responses, the computer scores or the teacher needs to go back and double check. And that could be because they entered something that looked like 235 or they wrote the words. It just kind of depends. Teachers should always go back and look. But the computer would give it a 1 if they got this correct. So I'm noticing that only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of my students got this incorrect, and I'm going to write those initials here as needing more acceleration. Now we're really going to start digging in to identify the need and looking at student work and responses. So we're looking at item 4, and based on the end of the year rubric, it does relate back to that deconstructed standard of 2 MBT A1. Now think back, what was that about? What was our level of rigor? You'll remember, or you can look at page 1 and 2 of your handout and find that it was conceptual understanding. If I look at this problem, Oscar uses base 10 blocks to model a number. What number is Oscar modeling? I may bring in that proficiency of strategic competence because a student just doesn't understand maybe these words, these terms, base 10 blocks, and what this is representing. They may not understand what it's asking either. So I'm going to think in those worlds, conceptual understanding and strategic competence. Remember, this is item 4 on paper and number 10 in Illuminate. So when we pull the student work, that's where we're looking. Here you can see we've gotten actual work from one of our content team members and their student who answered this incorrectly. The correct answer should be 235, and we really wanted it in standard form. However, when we look at this, we can see that the student started to put 136 and erased it, and it looks like they were even trying to put some words. So it looks like that the child settled on 136 or 135, and this is just the teacher's mark above it, so that's no need to worry. So we may need to go all the way back to conceptual understanding and pull out some manipulatives for this student during an acceleration time where they're working with the flats and identifying that unit as 100. Then we may need to go back to the rods and identify that unit as tens so that they can see 10, 20, 30, which they may understand, and then really looking at those ones units and counting specifically to get 235. How are we going to map out our instruction for July? Well, here's an example of what I might do as a second grade teacher based on those high need focus standards we decided in the domains of operations and algebraic thinking and numbers and base 10 operations. So that first week I really decided to push 208A1 throughout the week and focus heavily in on the numbers and base 10 operations at the beginning of the week using grade 2 mission 3 and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday using grade 2 mission 4. If you're not working the summer intensive program, use this time and these 2 weeks to kind of plan your 2 weeks of acceleration at the beginning of the year around that quarterly diagnostic and where you know students come in a little bit weaker. That second week I continue in my NBT realm with grade 2 mission 5 and then switch into some grade 2 mission 6 looking at these OA standards that lead to the introduction of repeated addition, getting our students ready for third grade multiplication. And I also went ahead and added that MDB6 because it's something that so many of my students missed. I want to kind of focus in on it that last day of acceleration if I have time. So the department has given us some Accelerate tutoring slide decks. And I want you to know that these were released in the spring of 2021 for virtual learning, but we plan to use them face-to-face, so there are some adaptations being made. And because they were released in the spring semester, they didn't start with the first missions. They started with where we were at that time. There are teachers and educators currently working in the realm of getting these slide decks prepared. I know this because I'm one of them, and I'm working to get them done, and we have deadlines so that mission ones will all be released prior to the August start date. But when you see this, you're going to see Eureka Math, and Zern is highly based and highly aligned to Eureka Math and Engage New York. So when you see module, that means mission, and I think we kind of know this from our background. You'll see this is for module 4, lessons 1 through 5. So in the regular school year, if I want to prepare my students for module 4, lessons 1 and 5, then I'm going to use this slide deck the week before I teach that in my core time. And that's because we're really accelerating the students who've been struggling with some of these standards before we get to the actual grade level content. And what I mean by that is, we know these are our focus standards that they may have struggled on the quarterly diagnostic, and we're gonna do this again and again and again, helping and working and reviewing. And these prerequisite standards are where we're gonna focus in on these tutoring sessions. So we're actually looking at the prereq standards before we get to this grade level content the next week. You'll see virtual manipulatives linked here. You'll see vocabulary, rigor, Desmos activities, which we're going to talk about in our next video, and notes for you as the tutor. They'll also provide templates if it's needed for the actual tutoring session. And you'll see that it's actually set up just like Zern, with fluencies and word problems, then getting into the concept development. So you can choose to use one or all of the fluencies, and then you get into the concept development. And in your tutoring notes on the slide deck, it'll have the same vignette or script that you're used to seeing in your Zern small group instruction. Look at page 7 on your handout for a direct link to the Accelerate materials, along with a guide in how to set up your own Desmos account. Now we're going to dive into the Desmos activities that are linked throughout some of those LDOE Accelerate tutoring sessions. Here you can see I've brought myself to the linked Desmos activity from that session we were just in. And this is really a guide, kind of like a Nearpod, where the students can work interactively. So again, use page 7 of your handout to access the link that tells you how to set up your own Desmos account. And these Desmos activities are shared by LDOE and all the creators who made them. Because we are a Google Suite district, when I logged in, it automatically set up an account for me with my Google credentials. If I click on one of these slides, you'll see that what the creators of this have done is take some of that concept development and making sure we're drawing those quick 10 drawings or some of the exit tickets, and just embedded them in another platform where the student can draw and write, just like in our open-ended questions of Nearpod, and gives you that in-time work so you can provide timely and specific academic feedback. We've got all of our resources. Now, what do? We mapped our instruction for the 2 weeks in the summer intensive program. So let's pull one of those standards. 2 NBT B5. I know that's a standard I want to focus in my instruction of those 10 days. So I go to my Year at a Glance tab on that 21-22 scope and sequence, and I scroll down looking for it. I find it in weeks 11 and 12, which fall in the second 9 weeks. So then I go to the second 9 weeks tab and I look for weeks 11 and 12. There I find that linked standard. I'm given all of the Zern mission lessons, so I begin to choose where my students may need the most focus. I can also read through my notes, see foundational lessons, and pull any of the Accelerate materials or other materials linked here to bring into that instruction based on my student needs.